All right, I think we'll get started. Greetings, everyone. This panel is on interoperability and scalability. My name is James Haft. I'm the co-founder of Crypto Oracle and Crypto Mondays, and now I'm running a company called Pal Capital, which is involved in the implementation of distributed ledger technologies by Fortune 500 companies across their communities. We're lucky to be here with a really interesting panel. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves and take a minute or two and talk about their company and the problem that their company solves before we start the conversation. So why don't we start with Zaki?
Hi, I'm Zaki Manian. I work at Tendermint. Tendermint is the company that has been primarily responsible for building Cosmos. Cosmos is a set of protocols and a set of systems for building a connected network of blockchains. We've been solving problems around consensus, proof of stake, et cetera, for about 5 years. We recently launched the Cosmos Hub, which is the first public blockchain built with sort of our entire technology stack.
Jack?
Yeah, I'm Jack Liu, founder and CEO of Wanchain. Wanchain is in the interoperability space as well. We launched on mainnet early last year and integrated with Bitcoin in mid-year, and also Ethereum in mid-year and then Bitcoin at the end of last year. So we're trying to connect all these different blockchains together, and at the same time, we want to build privacy as well. So for any of the blockchains we connected, these tokens can be moved on to Wanchain and exchange with privacy. So and that's what we do. At the same time, right now we are working on the EOS. Hopefully, in a couple months, we'll launch the integration between all these three major chains.
Pavel?
Hello, I'm Pavel Kravchenko. I'm from Ukraine. I have a degree in cryptography. I used to work in Stellar back in 2014, and since the same year I'm the founder of Distributed Lab. Our mission is to create financial internet where all the accounting systems are interoperable, but we believed we should not use words tokens, smart contracts, blockchain, etc. when we describe the problem, because it kind of introduces a lot of mess. So my goal and goal of my company is to bring value to business, to those who create more value, that we need to adopt this technology.
Harry?
Hi, I'm Harry Kalodner. I'm co-founder and CTO of Offchain Labs. We're a quite recent startup that we are building out a new layer 2 scaling technology. And what that means is that we're building a product that can run on top of other blockchains. And what it does is it'll allow those blockchains to run contracts that are scalable and are private without having to actually make compromises to security or modify the underlying chains. And so rather than kind of inventing a new blockchain, we instead want to make the blockchains we have today a lot more powerful.
Okay, so I thought that, can I just ask in the audience, raise your hand if you're a techie. And raise your hand if you run a business. Okay, so we're about evenly distributed, a little bit towards the business side. We're going to try and guide the conversation towards why is this subject important to people that run businesses, and try and talk about how these technologies and the scalability, interoperability, whether those concepts are important and why they're important to people who want to use the technologies to run businesses. So on that, starting from there, when I was talking to Zaki earlier, he put in an interesting framework here. He basically said we're talking about consensus where you have to focus on security, integrity, and governance. So starting with that, Zaki, talk about how you see this as being important concepts for people who want to rely on blockchain technology for their business.
So what seems to be the most interesting part about blockchains is they are a somewhat novel system for like incentivizing humans to cooperate with each other, which is what companies and legal structures have historically done for us. So that's why these things are interesting. But the challenge is always that what you are trying to automate is a bunch of human social processes. In fact, blockchains are not a solution to a technology problem. They are a technology solution to a social problem. So what we've been focused on in Cosmos is up until now, most of the blockchains that we've been seeing built are sort of empires. They try to get an entire large group of people all working within one unified system in which they all agree on sort of the basic characteristics of that unified system. Think Bitcoin or Ethereum. The vision of Cosmos is building tools that allow affinity groups to spin up their own blockchains and to have their own blockchains, govern those blockchains as they see fit, have the features that they see fit, and enable them to be economically interacting, so that assets, things of value, transactions can happen between those blockchains.
And Jack, how would you approach that same question?
Well, we are building the proof of stake consensus this year, and this same problem came to us, right? In terms of, let's say, how to how much token you want to be created, right? All of those have to be involved with on-chain governance, right? At the same time, we are struggle with centralization. How much decentralization you want to be, right? And you have to strike a balance between the performance and also the decentralization. Of course, everybody knows if you have less nodes and you run faster, right? So all of those questions, at the end, we pick a solution that let the community to decide, right? How much, or let's say, how to issue token, how much, and also how much decentralization you want to be, and the community can move them automatically, make the consensus algorithm flexible. That's the approach we are taking.
And Pavel, I know that you have your own perspective here. So in talking about the employment of the technology at businesses, how important do you think it is to focus on scalability or interoperability?
So basically, if we talk about, as I agree with Zaki, about social problem, how to reach consensus between people, and I guess, I believe there should be a definition of blockchain is the method of storage and synchronization of data between parties who do not trust each other. So then, depending on the level of trust, like whether it's like 3 banks trying to do reconciliation or unlimited amount of participants supporting Bitcoin, depending on these factors, you should use an appropriate consensus mechanism. And obviously, they all will be different. They will have different assumptions. You cannot have any universal consensus algorithm. That's why you cannot have a universal scalability solution, because proof of work, which is needed for fully anonymous permissionless situation, cannot be scaled up to millions of transactions. So, and if you have a business environment where you reach consensus between limited known parties, then you can use BFT or something like that, and this is scalable, this is fast, and interoperability has completely different perspective. So you're not thinking about 51% attack because it doesn't apply anymore. You're not thinking about permissionless, anonymous, like hackers or whatever, because they also don't apply here. So it's two different worlds, but they can live together. It's not a problem. It's just different conditions. So another example would be in public, open internet. You have many websites, whether it's a Facebook with millions of users or a small, pet project. But all these websites have the same APIs, and that allows these websites to be reached from any web browser, which can be installed on any device. And you don't need interoperability between websites. They just support the same APIs, and that's it. So I believe that all accounting systems, and effectively, blockchain is a technology to support an accounting system, should have uniform APIs, and then they will be approached by browsers, devices. That's I would call financial internet.
Harry, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I'll address this from a slightly different angle, which is to talk about why these properties matter and why scalability and interoperability are very important things to focus on. And to me, it comes down to kind of some fundamentals. And the simplest thing to state is that when somebody has a great idea for a blockchain app, we want infrastructure in place already that enables them to actually build that out. And that's not there today, and it really needs to be. And scalability means a lot of things, and it means things that people don't think about. For instance, one extremely important quality is the technical concept is time to finality. But what it means is when you send a transaction to the network, do you need to wait half a second? Do you need to wait 30 seconds, a minute, 10 minutes, an hour? And that has massive implications for adoption today, even with not very many users. And so this stuff is critical to focus on.
And so when you're talking about scalability, is the consensus engine itself the limiting factor? Is it the number of nodes that you need to approach, or is it the type of decision?
Yeah, I mean, the consensus mechanism is kind of at the core of the problem. I mean, so you know, I can speak about what my company is doing here. There's two main approaches to how you can use a blockchain. You can either use it to run your entire system, or you can use it just kind of to settle disputes and kind of make like large transfers, but otherwise kind of keep as much work as possible off of the blockchain. So kind of fundamentally, when you're looking at scaling, those are the two things you can do. You can make the underlying blockchain way more efficient and faster, or you can figure out ways to do less on the blockchain. And I think that both of those approaches need to be employed to get anywhere near the scale we need to reach.
Go ahead, Jack.
Can I add something? I think Zaki probably will agree with me. I think interoperability and the scalability can go hand in hand at the same time without considering the layer 2, right? Of course, we need layer 2, right? But in the layer 1 area, if we have, you know, we call it child chains or I don't know your term, right? You call peg zones or you know, side chains, right? If you have many of them, right, you move some of the tasks or individual functions into a subchain or child chain and make them all connected, and you can solve the you know, use the interoperability, solve the scalability problem.
Go ahead. Okay. So in terms of moving my business over to blockchain, is it important to move the whole business over, or should I be looking piece by piece and, you know, to build a puzzle? Zaki.
So, I mean, I guess that I think there's like sort of two classes of exploration of this. One class of exploration is sort of like blockchain native businesses. You're sort of seeing that with the DeFi space is kind of like, we're actually, you know, we've been talking about blockchain native businesses for like 5 years, and we're 2018, 2019 is when we started to see them actually sort of start to manifest in reality, which is pretty cool. And we're certainly seeing like adoption of that kind of thing in Cosmos, and Cosmos as a scalability solution in that space. And then, but you know, then you have this sort of piecemeal adoption of blockchain, and I expect that to be not as fundamentally transformative, in the same way that you didn't see e-commerce transform like legacy businesses. You just saw native e-commerce businesses like grow and find, you know, niches in the market in which they could exist. I think we'll largely see the same thing with patterns with blockchain.
And in looking at this equation, Jack, I know you're a believer in an open blockchain, in open systems, right? So how do you feel that are the advantages for the users, and what are the disadvantages?
Well, actually, I've been struggling with this with enterprise applications for blockchain, right, for quite a few years. The first project I was working with is called Factum, right? We create a standard interface so that anybody, or including the businesses, they can log the data onto blockchain, right? And later on, I have the company just provide the enterprise solutions, right? And we've been struggling with the businesses side. The reason is there are so many obstacles compared to the crypto world. It's so much free and open. It's so easy to do, right? Dealing with the businesses just so much harder, right? So many things to consider, including the regulations and so forth, right? And one thing right now with Wanchain, the approach is we just focus on the blockchain, right? We're gonna work with enterprises or the businesses side, let them or help them to create enterprise blockchain. So consortium chain or private chains, permission-based, we help them to build these blockchains. That's why we're working with Hyperledger and also EEA as well, right? We build these blockchains at the same time. We create the interoperability solution. We provide a cross-chain solution to them so that all those permission blockchain, private chains, that can be integrated with public chains, and that those assets can be moved on to the public chains, and then probably a few years later, everything will be open.
So I basically have a very simple way of putting the difference between enterprise blockchains and public blockchains. The appeal of enterprise blockchains is efficiency. The appeal of public blockchains is synthesis. And so efficiency is really easy to grasp because you can always be like, okay, this is my existing business process. This is how I make it better, faster, cheaper. Synthesis is always the novel thing. It's the unexpected thing. It's how you put a bunch, 2 + 2 and make 5. And ultimately, I don't think that we will ever see synthesis in the enterprise blockchain space. I spent like several years working on enterprise blockchains when I started in blockchains, and synthesis is fundamentally the more interesting and important thing.
Harry, where do you come out on this?
It's an interesting point. I mean, to me, I don't know, I get very uneasy with the number of different things that are all called blockchain. It's become a highly overloaded term. I guess when I think about blockchain, I still think about like the model that was started by Bitcoin of having a public network. I think that they're both incredibly useful technologies, but that kind of, when it comes to security, and my background is in security research, that kind of the promises they make are so fundamentally different, and what they do is so different that it's kind of, it's very difficult to have a conversation just because you're using the same words, but what they mean is so different. And so, like, to me, the trick is figuring out like how exactly to talk about these things and what the right way to split up duties between them is. I don't have a great answer for how to do that, but.
And Pavel, where do you come out, public versus private?
I would say that majority of people who are in this room, they do not understand words that we are like saying, because word blockchain doesn't explain anything. Like when you asked, should I move my business to blockchain? What is blockchain? To which blockchain? What does it mean for my business? So nobody knows. And it's just an account. It's just the foundation for an accounting system. We should not talk about this. We should talk rather about how can we make custodians like software more efficient, exchange software more efficient. How can we make custodian and exchange and the clearinghouse work faster together? It's not a rocket science. It's more about like APIs. Like, why do we have still like paper registry of land in many countries? Because just it's hard to change the infrastructure, but technology is already there. And about the open and enterprise, it's just different use cases. So blockchain in this regard, it's like a language. It's like English language, and we can use it in the small group, we can use it in the big group, we understand each other, but they do not contradict to each other. So just like the ways how we can weigh information and agree on things.
Okay, and if I came to you, okay.
Oh, I just want to jump on and add. I mean, to me, what blockchain means or what blockchain does is it gives strangers the ability to interact on the internet without an intermediary, which kind of enables so much stuff. And so, like, to me, like that's kind of all there is to it. And then a lot of the interesting work has been able to do how to do that more at scale, how to open up what things they can, in what ways they can interact. But that's what the fundamental comes down to.
So I'll just add something to what he said. It allows strangers to interact on systems where there is credible enforcement of rules. Yes. That being the missing piece, and that being the novel and interesting piece. And like what we are trying to do when we say we're going to scale blockchains is we are trying to build systems that credibly enforce rules at scale.
And what's the limitation to scalability there?
So right now, like prior generations of systems that like the sort of Bitcoin and immediate descendants could enforce rules, but securely, but only among a small number of participants.
And with limited complexity of what those rules are.
I want to comment on that. We can enforce rules on blockchain only if this particular system is the primary source of information for everybody involved. If not, then it's not an enforcement. And I agree that we let strangers to verify information, but because of two technologies. So again, blockchain is not a magic pill. It's a combination of two things. It's how do you connect digital data to each other using digital signature, and then how do you reach consensus between parties who run independent servers. It's a consensus, they're different. So until now, we cannot trust digital data because it's not signed. When we have a paper data, we see that the sheet of paper wasn't changed. And with digital data, we just see it on the screen, but we cannot trust what we see unless we have digital signature. That's why right now, if you go to the court and say, I saw this number on my screen in a mobile bank, they would not trust you. You have to find witnesses. They will swear to mom or whatever that they saw this number, and that's the only way to prove that you saw something. And with digital signature, they can do that because you will have a proof that the bank signed this transaction and you have a copy of it. And then with consensus, you can be sure that two systems, they have exactly the same state at exactly the same moment of time. So that's just two simple things. And then you can create any systems with any level of complexity.
Since you can do a lot of these pieces without a blockchain at all as well. So I mean, for instance, digital signatures, the world would be a much easier place if when you went on the internet, the person who was sending you data provided you kind of a signature attached so that you could show other people and prove that they sent you that data. And that's kind of core digital security infrastructure that doesn't exist.
It exists in Estonia, for example. Yeah.
And that's kind of something that would have even much broader implications than even just the blockchain if it existed, and also exist independently of it.
So in the future, what does the future look like to each of you guys? Is it the coexistence of hundreds of different platforms and protocols, or is there a convergence towards unity, or does that get divided by use case?
I hope in 5 years we will not have blockchain conferences. We will just talk about business, and then as cell phones that use some radio waves, nobody talking about radio waves. They're still working, right? Every second. So we will be just talking about how we can solve the problem of data that is sitting there and APIs that are bad or whatever. So,
well, I suspect that out of this sort of mix of things that are going to unfold over the next year or two, we could potentially be in a place where we don't have to at least have panels about scalability and interoperability. They won't be pressing problems on people's mind. People will be like, okay, this is a menu of solutions. They work good enough for me, and I can think about what are the business problems I can solve rather than how do I make a blockchain moderately useful to begin with.
Jack?
Yeah, I just was there, did a presentation of there. So what I'm thinking is in the future when we use the blockchain, probably people don't know or don't care about the blockchain technology behind the scenes, just like what we use the internet today, right? But how do we get there? I think that might be, I don't know how long or what kind of hardware technology improvement that will be required, right? And make it secure, make it, like wallet, on your phone is secure, right? All those things have to happen, right? And also on the business side, I think interoperability will be very important as well, right? So they can swap or change their tokens very easily, and they can manage the assets very easily, right? So I think to get there require many steps like what we did with the internet. It took us, let's say 20 years to mature, right? I think for blockchain it will be a lot faster, but the first thing probably will be, interoperability side probably need to have some kind of standards, right? And many companies will come out and integrate with different chains, but eventually we'll all sit down together and say, well, hey, here's TCP/IP for the future, right? All of us should agree that for private chains or public chains, here's the way we need to integrate together, right? And probably with different bodies like EA or Hyperledger or many other standardization like IEEE, things like that, right? So I think that eventually will happen, and we are working on it. I think it might take a while, but definitely faster than the internet revolution.
I mean, I definitely believe in a future where people need to think about the blockchain a lot less. That having to understand the blockchain is clearly a usability killer. And so we need to move it to a point where it can be much more in the background. I think there's a deep danger with that, though, which is the risk of losing what really makes the blockchain great, which is the lack of centralized trust.
Good after parties.
It's very easy to slip back into kind of centralized components because they perform so much better, especially when you're not paying attention. So I think balancing those kind of forces is going to be really important.
I would add a small thing that all the blockchain platforms will eventually come to the point when they standardize maybe 7 functions, like create an account, initiate a transfer, create an escrow transaction, do a market order, set a permission for identity, etc. And then nobody would care what's inside, how it's implemented. It just, you call the function and that's it. So transfer of tokens between blockchains, I doubt that will happen because it's like, it doesn't happen in real life. It's more like changing the ownership of the digitized right within the system. Nobody cares how the custodian of stocks is working inside or the banking system. They just work together because just owners are changed between the systems.
Zach, what do you think of
that? Do I think that no, I do think that virtualized and synthetic instruments are probably going to be a dominant theme in blockchains. Like, I do think that, like, basically, like, the principle that, like, you can virtualize in another computer the contents of another computer, which is, like, how cloud services work can be applied to these token systems pretty nicely. And that's basically what we've been building at Cosmos, is a framework for doing that. So I suspect that's much more a characteristic of the future.
So it's interesting. You guys all see centralization creeping back into the system here because we can't figure out a way around it. No? Jack, respond to that.
What do you mean centralization?
You're talking about standards being formed, by associations that are going to employ TCP/IP or IEEE, right? And those are centralized authorities that have their own points of view and may be at conflict with the users, and the purposes.
Well, I think standardization of, let's say, TCP/IP or HTTP protocols doesn't have to be centralized. Right? And I think the industry will sit down and together and come, little by little, or by winning, or some protocol might win, right? But eventually, I don't think that there will be just a very few, blockchains out there. There will be many, many blockchains. Right? Eventually, they have to talk to each other, right? So all of them have to work together. So there's no other way of coordinating and finalizing the standards.
Centralization and decentralization will, like, forever exist in tension, and there will always be the threat of institutional failure that will sort of constrain centralized institutions, and there will be the desire for lower social overhead from centralization. So, like, it just, like, the cycle repeats itself forever.
And I think, like, centralization and decentralization aren't, like, fundamental concepts that we, like, really need to care a ton about. I mean, decentralization is a means to an end. So, I mean, what we care about is reducing risk. And so kind of centralized components that don't increase the danger to me, I'm fine with. I'm only worried about a centralized component that can put my assets in danger or kind of disable my technology from integrating.
I think that centralization is necessary evil, as long as it's transparent and predictable, that I'm willing to put up with it. All right, anybody, I think we have 30 seconds. Anybody have any questions out there? All right, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
guys.
Much.